my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord is my strength and my song. God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord is my strength and my song.
Well, today you've noticed there's some children here in the service with us. That's because it's the fifth Sunday, and so we're going to be doing more of a family worship. That means it's going to be more interactive, and there's going to be some chances for you to discuss things and talk about it in the course of the service. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more child-friendly today. And glad to have you kids here with us, and hopefully it won't turn you off from church and worship forever. Okay? All right. This has been a funny time for me. All the time Joy is telling me, this will be your last this, your last that. But this is my last sermon as your lead pastor. So it's a chance for me to get all that stuff off my chest and onto your backs. All the guilt and shame, I want to put on there. No, we're not going to do that. Next week, Pastor Ryan's going to be starting a new sermon series on my favorite book in the Bible, Philippians. I think most people really love that book. He's going to be preaching a series on that that's called All About Jesus. It'll be a wonderful chance to learn. But today we conclude our look on salvation. That sounds funny because there's so much more to salvation than we've even talked about. But we've been looking at different theories of salvation, the different ways in which God saves us, and we talked a lot about how God saves us from sin and death, of course, but also meaninglessness, loneliness, slavery, addiction, all these things that have held us captive, held us back, prevented us from a full relationship with God and others, and how God has saved us for freedom and life and truth and grace. And we've talked about these overlapping theories of atonement, the ways that God does that, and the way that God moves. Today we're going to be looking at one of the most famous stories in the Bible. A while back we looked at John 3:16, which I think is the most famous verse. For God so loved, we could say it together, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Most of us know that by heart. And I know we hear it in slightly different words because we've learned it in slightly different ways, but that doesn't matter. We know the core of that truth. That tells us that God loves us. But if you want to see God's love revealed to us fully, we look to Luke 15. That is a story about God's heart for the last, the least, and the lost. And we're going to see it, I'm going to put it in its context. So we're going to look at chapter 15, verses 1 and 2 of the Gospel of Luke. So let's have that up on the screen for us. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. So Jesus is there with all these people who are normally cast out from the church that nobody wants to deal with. And as he's meeting with them, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So that's an especially telling thing because eating is, of course, table fellowship. And Jews have strict laws, even today, about who you eat with and how, kosher laws about how that's supposed to all operate. In Jesus' days, those were even stronger. You're not supposed to eat with these people. They would contaminate you, make you unclean. And Jesus is going to challenge that by, after they say this, he then begins to tell them about God's heart for the last, the least, and especially the lost. So we have a picture there of what it may have been like. Jesus there and the Pharisees critiquing him as they go by. Okay, so Jesus is going to tell them, first of all, about lost coins. So there's a woman who has 10 coins, and we presume this is kind of like a dowry for her. She would have probably worn these as a necklace around her, and always kept it with her. It's sort of her mad money in case her husband does something wrong. She can go and leave. It's her money that she brought into the marriage. She loses one of these coins, and she doesn't just say, "Oh, I lost a coin." She goes in and starts looking for it. In fact, the Bible tells us that she cleans the house. She sweeps everything looking for it. And finally, when she finds it, what happens? She brings in her neighbors, and they rejoice over her finding it because they're so glad to find what was lost. Right? And then there's another story about this, about a man, a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and he loses one. And he doesn't just say, the heck with that sheep. Sheep's worth a lot of money. You go and look for it, and you don't give up until you find it. And he leaves the 99 behind, and he goes and finds the lost sheep, and then he brings it back, and again, and there's rejoicing over this. So you get a theme going on here, right? What is he telling, though, these Pharisees? He's telling them that God has a heart for what is lost, and he's challenging them to have that same heart for the lost. And then he goes into the most famous story of the three, and this is the parable. And everybody argues, how do you name this? It's known to us as the prodigal son, but people argue about what it should be. Prodigal means somebody who's just throwing away their money, spending their life and their money on things that are of no value, right? Like, I don't know, teenagers. No, that's not fair. A lot of people spend their money on crazy things, don't they, in our world? They've thrown it away. But they spend their money, what about their lives? All right? This is a story about this. So let's look at 15, verse 11. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. Now, it never mentions a mother in here. I guess I've always assumed she was dead and that this guy's old and he's a widower. But it never says. She's never mentioned in the story. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Now, it's hard to say how horrible that is. Maybe you've known, a lot of us have been involved with families where crazy things happen. But essentially what the younger son says is, he says, "Dad, I can't wait for you to die. That could take a long time. I'd rather get my money now." Now, I can imagine what would have happened if I told my father this. He would not have been happy, and he would not have given me the money. That's not part of the story here, though. This man does. He listens to him, and he does it. Now, the share, if there are 2 sons, the older son, according to Jewish law, would receive a double share. So he'd get 2/3 of the estate. The younger son would get 1/3. It would be different. If there were 3 sons, let's go with 3 because I can do the math on that. The older son would have gotten half the estate, and the other 2 would have each gotten 1/4. See how that works? All right, he gets a double share. So the younger son gets 1/3 of the property. That's a lot, right? You can imagine. I don't know if you knew this, but Thomas Jefferson argued that in America, every year they should collect all the money from everybody who died, and then it should be divided to everybody who became of age. So if it was 18 or 21, whatever year it was, you'd all get your share. Do you think that'd be a good idea? It'd be interesting to see, because that there would be crazy things happening then from a lot of people, but others would use it well and wisely. Kind of an interesting thought. Anyhow, in this system, he gets the money. What's he going to do? Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So he moves out of town, moves away from all this, leaves it all behind, and he goes off to some unknown country, and we don't know what he's spending wild living. What does that mean to you? Could mean anything, right? Whatever he's doing is crazy, and he loses it all. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. Now, it's one thing to be in a foreign country, especially in the ancient world, when you have money. It's another thing to be there when you have nothing, because now you're incredibly vulnerable. This takes me back to when I was a kid. It was sort of the end of the migrant farm workers that used to come through, and we had around the farms where I lived, there were little camps where the migrants would come and live. And they were often Americans at that time, but they were often really poor and very vulnerable. They didn't have anything, and they really counted on the farmer because the local police did not look kindly upon them, right? They were vulnerable people. And it makes me think of that. Here's this guy, he has nothing now, and notice all his friends, whatever he had, they've disappeared. So he went out and hired himself to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Now, he's going to the fields to feed pigs. They're out there in the boonies, right? And they're running around. And so he's going out there to feed pigs. Now, we often misunderstand that because, of course, pigs are one thing to us today, but he's a Jew, right? Pigs are unclean animals that we're not allowed to eat, and now I'm feeding them to give them life. This is about as low a job as you can get. I remember sharing this story with my son Paul when he was a little boy. And he misunderstood this. Later on, I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he says, "I want to feed pigs." That is not the message of the story here. The message of the story is that is a bummer and not something that anybody would want to do. All right? He's feeding the pigs, and he has a thought that I can't remember ever having. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So, in other words, the pig slop's looking pretty good to me because I'm that hungry, right? I don't know how hungry you'd have to be to feel that way, but it's pretty sad. There's a picture of what it might have been like. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death?" He says, "This is crazy. I can't continue to live like this." He's hit bottom, in other words. "I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you.'" So I've done wrong to God, because there was an order that God gave us for how we're supposed to live, and it involves honoring your father and your mother. "And I've done wrong to you. I've sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. Now, how sincere is he in all this? I think he's sincere, but the story's just going to assume he is, and that he has hit bottom and in this. So now we get this part of the story that's so beautiful. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him." So his father sees him. What does that tell us? The father's out there looking for him, right? He's out there scanning the horizon, waiting and hoping for his son to come home. And when he sees him, he's filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. All right? And that's a powerful picture. Artists love this scene, and it's been shown lots of ways. And notice what this artist shows. The son comes in, he's barefoot. He doesn't have anything. His clothes are in rags. He's hungry, and he's weak, and he's ashamed, right? And the dad's running to him to greet him, forgetting all that. And many times they'll show the embrace, this rich, handsome, older guy with, all well-fed, hugging this guy who's poor and clothes in rags, right? It's powerful to think of this scene. And notice the compassion there. And he kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." So he goes into his prepared speech, and he says this message, "I'm not worthy to be called your son." So he's asking to come back as a servant. And his dad is going to have nothing to that. The father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is he's not coming back as a servant. He's coming back as a son. He gets nice clothes to wear. Clothes, especially in the ancient world, showed position and authority. And he gets shoes. Slaves didn't get shoes. He gets shoes, okay? And he gets a ring. Well, that's beyond, now he has authority, because the rings were often used as signets. They're a sign of, you're fully in the family. And then he says this, "Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." So it's not even enough that we do these things. We're going to have a party. "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. So this wonderful scene of a celebration and a party taking place. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So now we hear about the older son, who hasn't been a part of this story, right? He's been out working, been doing the tasks that were a part of the farm, and he's been there all the time. He hears all this, and he's going, "What the heck's going on? What's happening?" So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on, and he gets this answer. "Your brother, has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. So we're having a celebration because your brother's come home." And now, how would you react if you're the older brother? The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So he's pouting. He has a broken relationship with his brother, and he's angry about all this. So his father goes out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father in this way, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you." Notice that word? The younger son said he would come back as a slave. He says, "All these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." Whine, 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 right? He does have a point, maybe. He feels unappreciated, and this guy's getting all this stuff that I've never received. But when this son of yours, and notice that, not my brother, this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, notice he's assuming all kinds of things about his wild lifestyle, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him, right? And the dad responds in this way. He says, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." And that is literally true. In fact, I would say he's divided up the property between them. It's really the older son's property at this point, isn't it? He really owns everything. So the fact that he's not having a party is really saying something about himself, right? But we had to celebrate. We had to. It was imperative that we do this and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So this theme of celebrating the lost is a part of this. Now, I wanted this to be a little bit interactive. So I know you're sitting around with maybe people you know, maybe people you don't know, but I'd like you to find in a minute some people that you are around you, and you're going to discuss some questions I'm going to put up. The first question is, which character do you relate to in this story? Now, the main characters are, of course, the father, the younger son, and the older son. But I've heard people even go with the servant or whatever. I don't care. Think of who you relate to. And then the second question is, what is this story really about? What is its purpose? So start answering those two questions first, and then we're going to get to the third one that I'll stop everything and then go on that third question. All right, start talking. Okay, now it's time for our third question that I'm going to put up here now. And the third question is, how does it feel to be lost? How does it feel to be lost? Okay, so I'm going to ask this question now. I'm looking for people to just give me some input. How does it feel to be lost? Who can tell me how it feels? Especially looking for kids to give me some answers here today. Yes, how does it feel to be lost? Sad, okay. Any other thoughts? Isolated. Yes, sir. Yes. Scary. It's scary, okay. That's probably the number one thing people feel when they're lost. Yes, sir. Confused. Yeah, where do I go? What do I do? Okay. Any other thoughts? Ashamed, helpless. Yeah? Did I see another hand out there? Yannicka, I thought I saw. Oh, there. Yes. That seems like she's very reluctant to raise her hand there. You're raising it for her. I don't know. She's shaking her head no. I'm certainly happy to hear it, but okay. Anybody else? Yeah, you feel vulnerable, insecure. I'm sorry, what? Needy. Oh, I'm sorry. I totally misheard you. So needy, okay. Alone, yeah. You don't have the support or family or things that you need. You know, I work with a preschool a lot, and I ask them always that. We tell this story every year, and I say, how does it feel to be lost? You know what the number one answer is? I've never been lost. Which is a little hard to believe, because they're 3 to 5-year-olds, but in a sense, I bet that's true. They probably have been lost so little a bit of time that they really didn't notice it, and they've never really been lost because their family's always been looking for them. But I was thinking about this. Joy and I went camping. We had to, and I know people are going, why are you taking a vacation right before you retire? That seems bizarre. We did it because we didn't get to go camping last year, and Joy has to turn in hers in May, and we weren't sure about the timing of everything. And so, yeah, we ended up, and we were up camping in the Sawtooths, and I decided I was going to take the hike from, and I always get these backwards, Stanley Lake to Sawtooth, which, if you know, that was burnt really badly last fall. And so I went there and was walking on the trail, and it was, wow, eerie, completely burnt out. I thought there'd be grass or something coming back, but instead there was one pretty blue flower about every 50 to 200 yards, and that was it. And we're hiking along this trail. Joy, it was really hard to follow even on the ground, and then we got up, and Joy stopped going with me, and she says, don't get lost. Which, if you know me, I have a hard time quitting on a trail. You know, I want to find the end. And I was hiking up, and I reached the top, and boy, it was hard to follow it. It was really not good. And then I got to the other side, and the trail just petered out, and I kept exploring, looking for it, and I couldn't find it, and I was starting to get lost. And then you're thinking, oh, that would be so stupid. And then I'd hear Joy going, yeah, yeah, yeah. I told you not to get lost. You idiot, you know. And I'm looking around, and it's really hard to find it. And finally, after about 45 minutes of hunting around, trying to find the trail, I go find my way back. And it was a little confusing, because it's all burnt. It doesn't look anything like it normally does. And I get there, and there's a guy there with a GPS, who is standing there doing the same thing I was. He's the only person we saw up there the whole time. And he's going, yeah, I lost the trail 5 times. He says, if I didn't have this thing, I wouldn't have been able to find it. So, it's scary when you're lost, isn't it? You feel vulnerable. You feel like you don't have things. And when you're found, what does it feel like? Home, family, security. It means love and support, purpose, right? People that you care for, community. There's a church that named itself Home. That would be confusing in a lot of ways. You say, I'm going home. You never know what you're talking about then. But you can see the point there that they are trying to say, that a church should be a place to come home to find a connection with the Father and with other people. So, underlying this whole story is the idea that we were created to be in relationship with God and with other people. That underlies all this. Augustine talked about this a lot, and he said, and I think we have the quote, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Augustine went on to talk about this, saying that there was a God-sized hole inside each of us until Christ was there. There is a God-shaped hole in the human heart that only God can fill. Now, that is without a doubt, I think, biblical, right? I don't care if Augustine said it a little more tersely and concisely and beautifully, but that's a biblical concept. We're made to be in relationship with God, and when we're in true relationship with God, we're automatically in relationship with other people. Well, who is lost in this story? The title of the story usually is The Prodigal Son, which implies he's the one who wasted his life and threw it all away, and he's the lost one. And certainly he is lost. He is arrogant. He is an obnoxious twit, if you would. And he doesn't appreciate or value anything he has, and instead he wants to live a different way entirely. And so he takes everything he has and goes off in this wild living, trying to fill up that God-sized hole in his life with artificial things. Now, I know people do this all the time, right? You see people doing it. When I work with guys in prison, they talk about this. And it's interesting how other people talk about this, because they often talk about like there's real enjoyment in all this. I've been to the parties where people are getting drunk and whatever else they're doing, and it doesn't look like they're really that happy, does it? It looks like they're missing something, like there's a hole inside their hearts and their lives that they're trying to fill with artificial things. And finally, this young man hits bottom. And hitting bottom is a phrase we use, but it's such an interesting one, because people hit bottom in all kinds of different ways and places. Some people hit bottom when just a little thing goes wrong, and other people, they hit bottom because they're right there, and you go, where else can they go? But I've known lots of people who hit bottom and they're digging. They're keeping on going down because they can't admit that's where they are. It's interesting, sometimes we're working with guys in prison and they say, I don't want to be one of those jailhouse converts. Like, I'm in prison, but that would be, I can't be untrue to myself by coming to God now. Really? That makes total sense. Let's keep getting worse. Let's keep going in this path because it's worked out so well for you so far, right? You hear what I'm saying? You know people like this. I have known people who were alcoholics who could not admit that they had a drinking problem even though it was ruining their entire lives, right? So, when do you hit bottom? This guy hits it, and then he returns home to find the father and a home. I would also argue to you that the older brother, even though he never left home, is lost. He doesn't realize what he has, and because of that, he doesn't have real connections with his father or his brother or with anything. He is living a life that is based really not on love and grace, but instead on obligation and duty and routine. He's being a good boy. He's slaving away. Wow, he's a sad case, isn't he? I think he's sad. And of course, I want to say, who is this story directed toward? Well, the Pharisees who are listening to this, right? So who is Jesus saying this story is really about? He's really saying they're the older brother. Now, you may be hearing this and going, those Pharisees, they never seem to get it. If you're reading the story that way or hearing it that way, you're wrong. All right? When I was in seminary, one of the things they told me that really made sense to me was there's a tendency to read about the Sadducees and the Pharisees and think it's them. But who are they? They are the religious leaders of their day, the religious folks. Who are we? Especially, seminary students. We're the guys who are supposed to be the religious leaders, but I bet that includes most of you. I'll bet you when we talked about who you related to in this story, most of you related more to the older brother than to the younger one. Some of you may have related to the father, right, in this story. But I'm betting most of us related to the older brother because his story is really our story. And we feel this way sometimes. And he's speaking to those Sadducees and Pharisees who are critical of all this. And why are they critical? Because they are seeing these sinners and prostitutes as not related to them at all. Okay, part of being a Christian is learning to have, especially as we grow in the faith, learning to have God's heart in our lives, right? That's really what it means. We're going to grow and become more Christ-like as we go through this. We often talk about salvation. I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved. We're being transformed by God's power to become more Christ-like in our lives now, a process that will be continued after death, completed then. But that's what it's about, having that heart. And if we have that heart, we're going to rejoice that people are coming in, right? We're going to be happy that they're coming into salvation. I shared this story a few months ago, but probably most of you have forgotten it. One of my friends in seminary, he went on and worked with Maxie Dunham in one of these large churches. Maxie Dunham is one of the most famous United Methodist preachers of the last century. And he was working with him. He was in charge of their mission program at this church. And one of the things he did was he brought in this, they decided to do the homeless dinners right in the church because the area around them had gotten worse, and they decided that this was a good place to do it. And this upset all kinds of people in the church, right? Because, it's a little scary. You're bringing in all these different people who are there. And one woman came in and complained to him. My friend was there for this conversation. She's complaining to Maxie Dunham and saying, hey, we're bringing all these people in. They're wild, they're dangerous. And she says, why are we doing this? And Maxie Dunham says, we're doing it so some people can find salvation. And she said, I hadn't thought of that. That's really true. We want to have people come to know Jesus Christ, and these people will learn that. And he said, I'm not talking about them. And you have to hear that. These Pharisees who thought they were close to God weren't. And they're us, right? You need to hear that part of the story. How glad are we to bring in new people, new ideas, new things? And when salvation comes, it's about being found, right? The older brother thought the younger brother was out there having a great time. We know he wasn't. I doubt if he was having a good time when he was doing that wild living, but he certainly wasn't at the end, right? He was miserable. The older brother had everything and just didn't realize it. That's another challenge in this story. Do you know what you have and appreciate what is yours? That's so powerful to know. The good things that you have that are there for you to enjoy. There's a challenge to that spiritually. There's a guy named Brother Lawrence who wrote a book about how being a Christian is really about coming to appreciate the little things. And he had a job in a monastery where his job was to wash dishes. And if you can find Christ in washing dishes and doing the basic tasks that are yours, you really got it, right? Can you enjoy the things that you're able to do? Because I guarantee you, if you couldn't do it, you'd be upset, right? If you didn't have that home or that person, not everything in our lives may be ideal, but we need to learn and to appreciate what we have and the goodness of God that is revealed in it, right? So home, family, security, safety, support, all those things there in the presence of the Father, all those things available to us here and now in the church, right? If we're living the way we should. So a challenge for us, let's have a word of prayer, and then I've got one more task for you. God of compassion, you await the sinner's return and spread a feast to welcome home the lost. Save us from the temptations that lead us away from you and draw us back by the constancy of your love, that we may take our place in your household and gladly share our inheritance with others. Help us to celebrate those who are lost who come home. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.